can I get your feedback whether or not whether SLT has considered getting a small independent analysis done over our pricing assumptions? I hear often from GMs, LTP 10 years, they do a lot of projection of what the cost would be. And maybe that leads to, I don't want to use the word inflated, but higher estimates. So can I just have your insight into whether or not it's something would be more, rather than just having a staff-led, yeah. I can see the chairs getting frustrated at how long the question was, but I was trying to articulate the background.
I'm not frustrated. No,
okay.
No.
Sorry, I'm misinterpreting.
Sorry. I will work on the resting face. But I had understood there was an independent element. I'll leave Blair to answer.
Yeah, look, I think Councillor Wilson, obviously you're referring to the resolution passed through the LTP process.
Yeah.
ELT has not yet turned our attention to exactly how we give effect to that yet. So the question you raise will be one of the things to be considered as part of scoping up that piece of work. So we're just not at that stage yet.
Right, and that does actually relate to a motion that I've been working on with staff this morning. Yes, Kieran, if you're able to.
What I would just, before Councillor Sarah's just working on that, the approach that staff take to costing of all LTP projects is based around a P50 model, effectively, and we've talked about this through the LTP. So that is the basis. And the costing of projects is based on a very robust methodology and inputs. But you'll recall the resolution of that talks about, looks at the underlying drivers of our capital program as part of that. So that, I think, Councillor Wilson also speaks to what actually drives those costs. But the actual scope of that exercise and how it reports back and when yet to be determined. So.
Final question, if I could. There's been some argument that says the inflationary nature of cost escalation over the last couple of years has led to significant expansion and capital required. In light of the current I know we're technically no longer in a recession, but I think we still are. Is a timing an element in this equation, in the sense that if we brought forward some of these bigger projects, would we be better off negotiating now a significant expenditure during a slowdown in the economy to try to get some benefit rather than keeping them in the years that we have?
There's certainly no doubt that due to inflation, the later the project is, generally the more expensive it is. So you're quite correct, and history's shown that. And secondly, that in periods of lower economic activity, often there's opportunities to deliver projects to the market when the market potentially has more capacity. So both have elements of truth to them, Councillor Wilson, but of course that's also within the context of our ability to fund and afford projects, and so that's the other consideration. But there's no doubt that the last couple of 3 years inflation, we've all seen what inflation has been like, driven by a range of factors, and that has directly led to the prices that we're having to pay across the board.
Final question. In light of the fact that if we would spend that $500 million in Puketi, right, we're still vulnerable to a single point of failure. Is SLT turning their mind to whether or not they may rejig the priority and look at the Southern Water Treatment Plant as a standalone, as a priority above the improvements to Puketi? I was just, again, spending $500 million. We've still got the problem that it's a single point of failure.
Look, I'm not the best person to answer that question, but certainly our investment in Puketi is massive because it is the major plant in the city, and this investment is a necessary, critical part of that. So I'm sure that through that process, those questions may be posed, but the Southern Wastewater Plant is complementary to Puketi. The investment in Puketi is very much a needed, critical part of its future trajectory. I mean, the team are here if you want to go further there, but I just...
Or alternatively, like I talked about a desire to kind of have a briefing around that project in particular. So if maybe is that an action would staff be happy to take?
An action around the capital?
Having a briefing specifically on that project to just understand that business case and what, the different principles and drivers in it were.
I see Jackie nodding.
That it was signed off.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mangai Jadine.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair Sarah. My question relates to value capture. So at the symposium, were there any discussions about examples of what successful value capture looks like across councils? And are we an example? Kia ora.
Good question. So I think our council actually has some good examples of successful value capture using the tools that are currently available to us. And part of what I'm keen for us to do is actually set some of those out and summarise them for government to see what those look like, whether that's through, what we've done in Peacock with the Public Works Act and some degree of value capture that was achieved there when we bought property, that taking into account the fact that the roading and the other investment would increase that value of that property. There's been other examples of purchasing land or our emerging areas process before it was, taken over by Fast Track. But in terms of other value capture tools, there was some discussion, one of the but it was largely around actually the missed opportunities for value capture and how the tools are really lacking at the moment for local government and local transport agencies to really achieve it. And so CRL was kind of the example given where, properties will be expected to go up in value along around those stations, but they weren't able to really achieve value capture there. And the comment made that, in many cases, those who've achieved the best value capture have been the consultants talking about it. So, I think there's an opportunity for us to at least help to inform government, particularly noting they're looking to have a kind of state of play report to them by the 30th of June, and that thing that was sent through around value capture. So just on page 1, it's right at the top of their work program. I think there's opportunity for us to inform them at least of where we think there's better opportunities for assisting councils to achieve that, and ensuring we don't work at cross purposes.
I think Mangai Jadine, just Sarah's referred to sort of page 1 and page 2. That's the cabinet paper attachment at the very bottom of the table. There's quite a comprehensive work program there of various funding and finance initiatives. So my team are well connected with many of those officials through our Future Proof partnership. We have regular attendees from Department of Internal Affairs, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development as examples. So we are talking to, and I think there's an opportunity for us to help influence some of that thinking and to also outline, we have had some engagements directly where our council's been sought out by officials working on things such as the city regional deals, some of the DC changes, etc. that they are exploring. So that's good for us.
Thank you. Cool. Thank you. Some really good questions, and welcome to the Deputy Mayor. Right, are there any questions online? Oh, and Kesh has joined us. Welcome, Kesh, Councillor Kesh as well. All right, I will move the report and Councillor Ewan will second. All those in favour of receiving... Oh, sorry, and there are those... Sorry, we need to bring up the motions. Yes, that. So just want to make sure everyone has... What's that?
And we get to debate.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. I'm too keen to run an efficient meeting. There we go. All right, just checking everyone fully is over the motions there.
Do you want to explain B?
So B is just asking basically for us to have the opportunity to discuss with staff the scope of that CAPEX review that we agreed on in the LTP to ensure that it does meet what elected members are looking for. And so there's a touch point there, but it hasn't been determined exactly which committee that will sit within, so it's currently the relevant committee. And C is just noting that staff will come back to us in this committee around the implications of the LTP, for example, to what capacity do the investments that we've included in the growth program, increase our capacity for population growth, and what are the other implications? So just really understanding, I guess, what our investment is providing around growth. Any questions? We will move to debate. I will, at this stage, maintain my right of reply, but I think I've spoken enough. So, Councillor Ewan.
Yeah, look, I think the report was a really helpful report. It certainly outlines some areas of opportunity and concern. I'm really very concerned at the escalation in cost of infrastructure, and I'm mindful that I can understand a little bit post-COVID how that has unfolded, but as we go into a slowing of the economy, I think there is an opportunity to revisit both the accuracy of some of the quotations and the timing, and I look forward to having that discussion, and we're gonna be able to have that discussion. So I think that's really helpful. I have to make the observation that we often in this chamber talk about that the current funding model is broken, and I don't think many of us disagree. And I think we often say the way to solve this is through getting a take of the GST and other mechanisms. I'm very mindful that with this current strategy in government, I don't believe that's likely. I think the priority has been for tax cuts, and although that personally may benefit me, I am very mindful that we still have the elephant in the room that we're not addressing. We have high demands, a desire to set gold benchmark standards in water quality. We have a small rate take, and the government is going to have to give us a bit of a share of the tax take, and I don't see that likely to happen. The reason I reiterate that is it goes to the very point that I think the Chair has highlighted. Some of our decisions in the LTP means that our ability to grow will be slower. I don't think that's going to improve in the near future, and I don't see a solution.
Andrew.
New Zealand's infrastructure is 4 times the OECD average. Some of that could be down to population, but we can compare it to Sweden, which is the same population as New Zealand, and we are twice that. Some of it could be down to geographic features such as earthquakes. Well, we're twice the average in Japan, which has got similar earthquakes and geographic features. So there's no real excuse. We are far too high in our infrastructure costs. If we could get it down to just twice the OECD average, that is still terrible, but would absolutely revolutionise the council's finances. So we really do have to do something about this. I've been a consultant to several councils in the region. And I can tell you that when I was putting in fee offers to councils, I would double my fee. This was not to fleece the public purse, but because there were so many extra meetings, so much more paperwork, that I didn't actually make any more money out of that. In fact, I usually end up just breaking even. So it is actually within the council's power to change the way we do things to reduce the cost of infrastructure. And with staff looking at our CapEx options, I encourage them to be radical and extreme and think what would be the best to get the job done, and then tell us how we need to change. And there is the political will to make that change. And if it means things like actually giving staff more power to make decisions and get on with jobs, that's a very likeable option. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew. Anyone else who would like to debate? No? I will exercise my right of reply. Firstly, yeah, I agree, absolutely. We need to be looking at the cost of the infrastructure we're putting in. I thought what was really interesting in the presentation from the Infrastructure Commission was their point that they made that the amount that we put into infrastructure hasn't really increased much more than 5-something% of GDP, 5.8% of GDP historically. It's gone up and down, but overall it's kind of stayed somewhat consistent. And so often we talk about this massive infrastructure deficit that we have, and within that it seems to be implied that we're suddenly going to ramp up how much we're putting into infrastructure, but that takes charging more in terms of user pays, or taxing more, or taking on a lot more debt. And then the question becomes, you know, at local or central government level, how willing are we to do that, and how willing is the population to carry those costs? So I think that was kind of sobering in some ways to think actually this really, we cannot expect that there will suddenly be a massive hike in investment nationally in infrastructure, although we do need an increase in investment. So there was a lot of discussion around how do we make the most of the existing infrastructure we have. Water meters is often brought up, along with congestion charging. I will say though, congestion charging, I think we're seeing growing support in the likes of Auckland for that. Tauranga didn't have such a good response when they started to talk to their residents about the prospect of congestion charging, and for a city the size of Hamilton, we may find that a challenging conversation to have for some time yet. So I'll be fascinated to see whether the government puts that back onto councils in terms of actually the political capital needed to make something like that happen. But yeah, it also goes to the cost of our infrastructure, and what are our risk appetites around infrastructure, and what are our levels of compliance and standards that we want to reach versus our actual willingness to pay as well. So there's a lot for us to unpack as we kind of look at how we go forward. All right, thank you. We will now go to the vote. So all those in favour of receiving the report and the motion, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Oh, sorry, we'll bring it back up again. Do you want? Yeah, okay. It was essentially that staff come back with the scoping of the review of our CapEx program. It was and a noting of information to come back to this committee. Yeah. Okay, so all good. All right. Thank you. Moving on to the General Manager's report. Leah, I'll leave that with you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a few brief comments, and I'll take the basis of the report as read. Late last week, Mayor Paula, Chair Sarah, and myself and a couple of staff met with MP Simon Court, who is the Under-Secretary for the Environment, I think is his official title. And we actually canvassed some of the matters in the report here today. He reached out to Sarah, and Sarah may wish to comment. Just really wanted to explore and test Hamilton's, on-the-ground experience in terms of RMA, land use, value capture, and our intentions around things such as fast track, to understand on the ground some of the things that he has been tasked to lead on behalf of the government around RMA reform. And so the matters that I've touched on my report here were further examined with our discussion with MP Simon Court. And so he is from the ACT Party, but he's obviously been very much a driver of the thinking in terms of RMA reform. He outlined that there are, as my report reflects, a number of upcoming decisions and pronouncements coming from the government in the space of RM, and that they are looking to introduce a number of quite significant changes to help, address some of the outcomes that the government is seeking in terms of faster processes to get things delivered, a focus on housing, a focus on delivery of outcomes linked to both the fast track direction, but also just linked to, removing some of the reported challenges with the current RMA system. So I guess my report is sort of read in the context that we have had subsequent engagement, and as I say, Chair Sarah may wish to comment on that, but I'm happy to take any specific questions on the matters in the report.
Yeah, no, it was a good meeting. MP Simon and also the Undersecretary reached out after our fast track submission. We had good engagement with that, and really he was interested in ensuring that when they're looking at implementation of the overall reform of the RMA, that they're understanding what that means for councils and how we actually ensure that the implementation side of things works. So that was really positive to have that engagement and to see that he's thinking about the implementation side of things and what it means for councils. A really big focus on trying to simplify things in terms of the RMA, what can be codified, what can, how can decisions be made more directly. But I think it would be helpful maybe in a future report to understand a bit more around the principles and the thinking for that overall RMA reform, because it sounds like it will be very significant. And the first couple of stages are more smaller tweaks, changes, but that overall reform is going to potentially be drastically different to what we've got now.
Yeah, and I think just final comment from me, the phase one first bill that has been out for consultation, which we actually have chosen not to submit on, is in our view, as staff, not that significant to the city. But bill number 2, as Sarah referred to, that will probably be very significant, and we'll take a close interest in that. And some of the matters that we canvassed with the MP was certainly in his thinking in terms of some of the issues that he's looking to advance. An example being offset mitigation and conversations around potentially how development impacts in one area potentially could be mitigated and offset elsewhere. So we had quite an in-depth conversation. He was quite frank in some of his feedback on that particular topic. So I think RMA bill will be probably very significant in terms of us as an urban authority.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you want to? Yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you,
yes.
Madam Chair. It would be helpful, Blair, if you would explain what his preference was, or is it in a confidential context? You raised it that he made some statements.
Look, I'm mindful of not. I don't really want to try and get in and share things that are pertinent to the minister, to the MP.
The questions on this report. I just had one question actually, and that was talked about the RMA looking at being more enabling around mixed zoning, and then we've also had the granny flat announcement lately. I was just interested in implications there, unless maybe it's better to sit under the district plan update.
Maybe we can cover that in the district plan update. And Mark, can we just pick that up when we get to district plan?
Cool, thank you. Mange Jadine.
My comment was question was in relation to the submission on RMA freshwater and how it isn't of relevance to HCC. So I just wanted, for someone to have to school me on that, why it isn't relevant.
We'll just
As
get Mark
relevant.
to join us. But look, I think at the highest level, we are having to also very much prioritise our resourcing and staff, and we've got a number of highly significant pieces of work. So, but I'll let Mark just talk about why we're on this one.
Yeah, kia ora mangai, Jadine. So, look, the first wave of reform was really aimed at the rural sector. It was part of the coalition agreement between ACT and National in terms of on-farm standards for freshwater drains and the like, biodiversity and things like that. So really, while obviously freshwater is a concern to us in an urban environment, what the bill was aiming to do was to change the effects management hierarchy in terms of how some of the on-farm management plans were being rolled out and things like that. So hopefully
Thank
that
you.
answers it.
Yep,
Yeah,
it does.
yeah.
Thank you for wrapping that up.
Mark. Right, if there aren't any further questions, I'll move. Councillor Emma, would you like to second? Right, is there any debate? No? All right, all those in favour of receiving the report, say aye. Thank you. All right, moving to strategic issues. Again, Blair, if you want to make any further
Yeah,
comments.
thank you. Look, we've got a few matters that we would like to just take individually through this report. There are a few significant issues. The first of those is our application on the fast track bill. So Jackie and Kyle will just briefly speak to that one. They are the people who've done the substantial heavy lifting on this. So I'll hand over to Jackie and Kyle.
With pride.
I was going to say, a nice scarf. I did wear a Chiefs jacket.
With pride.
I did wear a Chiefs jacket going down to Wellington for the symposium, and I wore it the whole time, representing the Waikato. What? Yes, yeah, I did. All right.
Kia ora
Jackie,
koutou, ko Jackie Collier tōku ingoa.
Ko Kyle toki ingoa.
I believe many of you have received this update through other committees. We have presented it to the Joint Management Committee with Waikato Tainui as well. So really just in summary, staff considered a number of projects that we could potentially put forward for consideration as part of the fast track Schedule 2 bill Schedule 2. That process involved working alongside Mana Whenua and Waikato Tainui. Through that process we identified two projects that we consider to be very strong candidates or programs, I should say. The first is our wastewater treatment plants. So as you know, the Pukete wastewater discharge consent expires in 2027, so we need to renew that. And our view at the time was that it would make sense to bundle Pukete and the Southern Wastewater Treatment Plant applications together. The other was the bulk wastewater storage program, which most of you will be familiar with. So both of these programs of work are already in play, absolutely critical to the city. So we're really just taking advantage of the fast track approvals process. We're not sure whether we will get on the schedule or not. We've made the applications with full support of Waikato Tainui. So this is really just sharing for your information. Kia ora.
Do you have a question on that, Emma? Councillor Emma?
Quick one, just to check. In your workings in partnership with Mana Whenua and iwi, was there any significant concerns in fast-tracking this particular project?
We had an initial list of over 10 projects. Kyle put together an assessment matrix and we did an initial screening, so some of those things dropped off, and the screening considered whether we satisfied the eligibility criteria, whether we had sufficient information, whether we had funding to actually deliver the project, because if you get on the bill and you get your fast track consent, you have to be able to commit to actually implementing those consents within a tight time frame. So there are a number of factors that we considered. Through that process we came up with a shortlist, and that shortlist did include some activities that we hadn't had significant discussion with mana whenua about. For example, the idea of seeking a comprehensive discharge consent from our wastewater network. So we have a program or project funded in the LTP to pursue that, but we haven't really started it. Another project that was on the shortlist was whether we should consider applying for a comprehensive water take consent, so increasing our current allocation. But again, we hadn't had a lot of discussion about that. So as a result of our shortlist and further discussion, we landed on the programs that we put in applications for. And I think part of the support was because we've been working alongside our mana whenua partners for many years on these projects. So they're not new projects, they're not projects that they're unfamiliar with.
Can I just add to what Jackie said? Two things. I think it shows the value of the business case work that we have done, for example, on the both referred to earlier, Puketi and Southern Wastewater plants. So that exercise has really shown its value here, hasn't it, Jackie? And likewise, the work that the team have been doing on the wastewater storage devices around the city. But second comment I would just add here is the team had literally 1 month to turn around from the bill being released, an invitation being invited to lodge in applications for full-blown consents. It was a massive undertaking, and I don't use that lightly. The amount of time that the team had to put in here to put these applications in was phenomenal, and to land something that would be highly credible to go in front of a fast-track assessment panel. We couldn't just put on a quick, simple application. It was comprehensive. I just want to take my hat off to Jackie and Kyle and the team. It was amazing.
And if I can, just want to acknowledge Kyle, who did the lion's share of the heavy lifting for us.
Thank you very much, both of you, Jackie and Kyle, for all the work that went into this. I do have a couple of questions. One is around, you touched on the criteria for them, and the funding for the Southern Wastewater Treatment Plant is now sitting, the construction money is sitting outside of the LTP. So do you think that will impact on the likelihood of it going into Schedule A?
Look, we're just waiting to see whether we make the list. I think if we do, it is something that we'll need to circle back to and have another look at. Whether it's something that we can seek to be amended on the schedule, whether there's some way, because we've proposed to bundle the two discharge consents, whether there's some way of leaning on Puketi as, I guess, as us giving effect to the consents or not. Yeah, we need to wait to see what happens with the expert panel's assessment first, and then what our options are to manage the potential to not be constructing the southern plant.
Okay, thank you. And I assume we've talked to WRC around this as well as the main consenting authority? Yep.
So just to let you know, because these are both live projects that we need to pursue anyway, we've reached out to Regional Council looking at consenting options. So even down a conventional pathway, we've asked them, is bundling an option within the existing RMA framework? They've told us it is, and they've identified who their consenting officers would be for the project. So really important part of delivering a project like this is to not sit alongside your regulator, but make sure that they are part of the conversation from the beginning.
Yep, thank you. Right, there don't appear to be any more. Oh, yes, sorry. Yep. Thank you, Councillor Maxine.
From an optics perspective, are either of these projects at odds with the submission that we made on the fast tracking bill?
I don't think they are.
No.
I think they're consistent with our submission. Both programs are critical enablers to not just meeting our obligations under Te Ture Whaimana, but providing for the future growth of the city. But I can pass over to Blair to add.
Yeah, look, I think Councillor Maxine, these projects were seen as a critical part of our city future, and in fact, when taken in conjunction with the projects which we know around the city which have lodged application requests, highly aligned. So.
points we made was that any fast track approval for developments, on the fringe of the city needs to be a package with the enabling infrastructure, so such as a treatment plant. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maunga Jeding.
I have an optics question too, which I think you touched on before, but I just want to get clarity. So in terms of us looking to fast track things in relation to Southern Wastewater, from an optics perspective, the delay of the spend, 75 million, do you think that that's going to have a negative impact on our application? If any.
That's a good question. I'm not sure how closely the panel are looking at funding. Applications came in from all corners of the country, so not just councils. So that includes private developers, and I imagine the expert panel don't have line of sight on whether the funding's secured to deliver those projects either. I think if we are successful in getting on the list, that is something that we will need to look at closely. In terms of the timing of our applications and the conditions that are in the applications, and whether we can meet that two-year time limit, either through starting construction of the south or some other enabling works, and whether we can do something at Pukete which would trigger the consents as being activated, because Pukete we're going to need to do work. Irrespective, but we need to really circle back and have a look closely at what the provisions require, and whether we get on the list. So that's the first thing, we need to get on the list first, and I guess then what options are available to us to either try and meet that 2-year timeframe in some way, or potentially amend our project.
If I can just chair, I think those projects that presumably finally make it onto the lists, either 2A or 2B, will obviously have greater attractiveness to capital investment or funding than those that aren't. So I would imagine, Maunga Jeding, that if Southern Wastewater Plant is indeed included on the list, it would start to focus this council's attention and future-proof around that project.
See anyone on Zoom? I don't have a very good line of sight of our Zoom members. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. Yes, please.
So the next item on the list is the future-proof update, and specifically the recommendation to adopt the future-proof FDS strategy. So I might just invite the team down to speak to that. So Mark, Davey and Chris Dillon. Chris is our lead senior staff member, for those who haven't met Chris.
Yeah, thanks Madam Chair. I'll let Chris do the talking, but just in terms of formality, I know I recorded it last time, but I'd just like to record it again in terms of my conflict of interest sitting on the advisory panel overseeing fast-track applications. Thank you. But I'll hand over to Chris to talk about future-proof.
Thank you, Chris.
Good morning, everyone. As per the report, a total of 49 submissions were received. Some of them are proposing some quite extensive changes in and around Hamilton. And essentially, the decision was made by the deliberations committee to, I think, refuse the submissions and pending other processes that are going on, the emerging areas process, and also what has been investigated through future-proof, the concept plan development as well, which will address in sufficient detail the implications of pursuing the rezonings in and around Hamilton that are promoted through these submissions. So the emerging areas process, as you know, is being merged with the fast track process, but the assessment within that combined process is still very much comprehensive, as was initially proposed through the emerging areas process. And similarly, the concept plan process which will focus on two main areas, Hamilton and to the south out to the airport, and then Hamilton out to Matamata and the Matamata-Piako corridor over to Tauranga. That will adopt a similar assessment process as per the emerging areas fast track process, so allowing a comprehensive consideration of all the matters that you might think are applicable to the assessment of such proposals, including the need for such rezonings, the environmental implications, implications in terms of iwi, mana whenua, matters like that. So what's proposed to you today is an adoption of the recommendation made by the deliberations committee, and open to any questions.
And I did sit on the hearings on behalf of council, so I thought it would be appropriate just to make a few comments. Essentially, it was a refresh of the existing strategy. We'd only just basically signed off the strategy, and then because of government policy changes had to do some updates. We did get, quite a few in submissions around recognising further parcels of land. In terms of, emerging areas, I guess, we don't want to jump ahead of that process. So that will be communicated to those parties that, we're still actually in that emerging areas and fast track process with them. But also what I guess I observed through the hearings process is there's really a need to take a different approach to the future development strategy, in my view, that we take more of an approach that we are with emerging areas. We're able to properly assess applications and get agreements around provision of infrastructure and things before, going and recognising areas for growth, and then, but not actually having any agreement to put in the infrastructure for them and things. So I think it's a little bit of a switch around in terms of how we approach it. So I think it's a really positive development in, I guess, our thinking of strategic planning going forward. Yeah. Right, any questions? No. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mark. Okay, Greenfield Ruakura. I have to say it is now very warm. I don't know if everyone else is feeling like this is the good temperature or it's a little too warm.
Yes,
if we're able to.
I just wonder whether Chris may want to come forward for this particular update. So, and I do note that we do have in a later part of the agenda an update on from Tainui Group Holdings on the Ruakura precinct. So we can hold some of the more detail there. But this is really just to give a brief update on the major infrastructure considerations in Ruakura, including the Eastern Transport Corridor and some of the water infrastructure. So Chris, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to briefly introduce.
Sure. Sorry, I just caught me a bit by surprise. I won't have the reference, but I'll just quickly talk to it from memory. So we have funding allocated this year for to progress the design of the Eastern Transport Corridor. The Eastern Transport Corridor is really important to the ongoing development of the inland port and the transport network on that side. The update that I wrote for this report had a sequence of events which have changed, so I'll just explain that, and that was after talking to Deputy Mayor Angela. I think the report indicated that we would come to her meeting first with seeking a procurement decision to get on the way with the design, and then come to this committee with the business case, and along the way a scope sort of agreement with council on what we were doing. So after discussion with Deputy Mayor, I saw the error of my ways and thought that we got that sequence wrong, and that the first thing we should do is come back to this committee next time with a really comprehensive update of the business case. Prior to the meeting is to have a briefing with council where we can talk about the scope of the project and the business case, come to this committee, seek endorsement of the business case, and then the following next sequence is then to come to the infrastructure committee, probably for the procurement decision and probably a decision on the macro scope. So that's a slight change to the sequence that's in the report. So hopefully that's a much better process. The business case work has been going for a long time, so it's quite well developed. So it's just, we're in the process of getting that ready to bring up to council and just update you on, quite a journey in this project. It started way back in 2008, so it's got a lot of history. There's a lot of PDAs, there's a lot of agreements that are in place about this ETC, so it's bringing current council up to date with that journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. And I note around paragraph 30, it talks around the macro scope and the impact of the GPS, and the intention to date, my understanding was for this to become a public transport corridor along with, a general traffic corridor. And I've seen the regional council working on that basis too. Can I understand, is that still the plan?
Yeah, I think that's the essence of why we need to come to you. Like the GPS is really interesting, probably supportive of the ETC as a road, but not much more. So we need to bring it to council to match the GPS with council's expectations and for this transport corridor. So we, as you know, we're deliberately calling it a transport corridor and not a spine road to indicate that it's a modal purpose transport corridor. So we just need to try and match that as best as we can with the GPS as well, because we would welcome funding assistance to build it. So we're just trying to match the two together, and that's the primary purpose of bringing it to you. We have an agreement with developers that shows the cross section exactly what it's going to look like. Now that's getting to be 8 to 10 years old, so I guess it's updating that expectation as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Mangai Jadine.
I'm not sure who this question is going to, so I'll just ask nonetheless. When I read through the papers, there's a lot of commentary in relation to Tainui Group Holdings and a lot of what they bring to Hamilton City. So does TGH have any more of a positive lens attached to their projects, given the substantial outcomes that they're delivering to our city? So within in terms of live and work and play, it's more than 1,000 people employment, looking at 1,600 homes in Ruakura. So my overarching question is does that factor into our decision making in terms of the applications to Hamilton City Council wanting to get things done for our city? Kia ora.
Blair, did you want to take that?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to. Look, I think Mangai Jadine, first comment is part of the reason why we've invited TGH to give us a confidential update is to recognise their strategic importance to the city. So absolutely number one. Number two, we have regular senior meetings with TGH, which myself, Mark, Chris, for example, attend, given their strategic importance and the investment in the city, both in terms of in the central city, Ruakura, but also in Rotokauri. So we recognise their critical importance in the city. And thirdly, I think that's reflected in our joint investment, where we have invested together and continue to invest together, for example, in Ruakura, where we have agreements and we have a number of joint arrangements around infrastructure. So absolutely, we recognise the critical importance that they play in an economic and a wider social wellbeing sense, and we want to see that continue.
Supplementary to that, do you think that they will think we could have moved faster?
I think that is always a natural commercial tension between any developer and council. And I would say the conversations that we would have with TGH would be similar to other developers who would always want us to move faster and always want us to invest in their particular development above others.
Yep.
But I think what I would say publicly is that we have, for example, publicly invested together with the government and TGH through Shovel Ready and PGF and Ruakura, which is a unique opportunity where we have supported that area. But there will always be that natural tension.
Yeah, ka pai, because from my perspective, we might get a lot of developers that come into the city and they come and go, whereas Waikato Tainui, TGH, they're not going anywhere, right? They're invested. So it's just, just comment. Thanks.
Chris, I do have a few more questions on this, and I know it's coming back to us, but I'd like to know how frustrated I'm going to be when it does come back. With the, is the footprint that we have of the land for the ETC enough for what is intended around including public transport provision?
Yes, I believe so, yep.
Okay. And if the GPS is not supportive of co-funding the part of it, co-funding a transport corridor and only a road, are we able to still, receive co-funding for like a partial co-funding of the project?
I think it's probably just too early to understand that, like the GPS, people like us is still trying to interpret it. I suspect Waka Kotahi is still trying to interpret that as well.
Okay.
So I think our position will be to start with what we want to see as a city and how do we then wrap a funding plan around that. But, with the three partners being government, council and TGH, and indeed Chedworth and the north who are progressing on parts of this transport corridor as well. But I think it's just too early, to me, to build a road without basic walking and cycling facilities doesn't seem right. So we just need to work through that and what that means.
Okay, thank you. And just a question to Blair. I know that with the City Deals work, we're not into projects yet, but if Ruakura is seen as a focus for a sub-regional deal, are we able to look at, start thinking about some ways that a deal could help to solve this issue?
Through any city deal, we'll be looking to try and solve as many things collectively. And I know we've got an update on city deal very shortly.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool, thank you. All right, Councillor Maxine.
Thank you, Councillor Chair Sarah. Just on the back of your question regarding the existing infrastructure that's around that area already, and it showcases a really great way for people to be able to move. Are we able to use that example in the business case to, I guess, showcase the risk of a mismatch if that corridor doesn't also have some of that advantage?
Yeah, I think continuity of standards would be one of our key points. I think we're aware too, just, the environment at this time, probably around this table and government table, is to not gold plate and just look at the scope. So I think we're obligated to look at the functional scope, but also continuity with what we've built and, a whole range of things. But that's certainly a starting point for us, because we've built a stub into the land where the corridor is going of a certain standard. So to substantially change the standards would be interesting, but that's certainly what we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Good question.
Look forward to it coming back.
Yeah.
For overview and macroscope.
Thank you. Those appear to be all of the questions on this one. Thank you, Chris.
I think, Chris, you may want to just stay there for the next item, which I'm going to invite Mark down to join you for.
Yep.
It's a sort of a double team.
I'm
one, so,
open to diligence.
he's probably trying to play catch up. Think, what is this item? Northern River Crossing.
What page are we on?
So
Page
I
we
might,
on, Blair?
the Northern River Crossing. I'll let Mark lead out and Chris can catch up.
Hi again, thanks Madam Chair. Under the same agenda, in the next item we're talking about or referencing the likely Fonterra private plan change that we're expecting to be lodged. And obviously that throws up issues with regards to Northern River Crossing, an important east-west northern corridor going from Kura Drive in the west all the way east to ultimately Horsham Downs. Resolution Drive. So the thrust of the problem is that we haven't designated the corridor, and the land uses as proposed or about to be likely proposed by Fonterra will possibly inhibit the best route alignment for that corridor, and will start to set in place a direction of travel for that corridor. So I don't know if Chris wants to add anything more to that.
Probably not. I'm assuming that everyone's orientated, but if not, if you're on the Te Rapa bypass and you come to the Kura interchange, it's a connection from there across to the river, to what we call HT1, which needs to tiptoe through the Fonterra land and also Empire land. So in the absence of being able to designate it, our strategy is to just try and work closely with both of those developers to look at a sensible location for the transport corridor. Really interesting issues about rail crossings and what our strategy for crossing the rail is as well. Our biggest problem is we don't really know on the other side of the river where to head to. So those are the things we're working through, and we only know that if we had the designation funding and we'd done the work and the geotech and the engagement. But in the absence of that, we're doing the best we can just to work with the developers of that area, Fonterra and Empire in particular, just to make sure we see if we can arrive at a really sensible land use pattern.
Chris, would you say this is a good example of the need for forward planning? And investing in and funding forward planning.
Like it is, and I think, elected members know that's why we designate projects hopefully well in advance. So we can signal, to the market, to the developers, to the community of where with certainty our transport routes are going to be. So ever since I've been here for 15 years, the Northern River Crossing has been somewhere in the LTP, but it never moves forward. Yeah. And to be fair, there's been other higher priorities like the Rotokauri designations, the Peacock designations, but it is probably one of our more important designations at some point in time to just plan for the future and put down a corridor where people can start developing, knowing that's where the transport corridor will be.
Mm. Okay. Presumably it would be in the best interests of, say, Fonterra, who are initiating the plan change to have, the right corridor in the right place for this crossing. So are you confident that we'll be able to work with them and work through this with, I guess, the information and the resource that we do have at the moment?
From my perspective, those discussions are ongoing and they seem as positive as they can be at the moment, and willingness to engage with us.
Okay.
I think the tricky bit is to make sure Empire and Fonterra are working together as well. So some good discussions going on at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, Madam Chair, and important for all members to understand is the fact that without a designation, there's no legally enforceable corridor that the city has. Yeah. So we are fortunate insofar as the fact that Fonterra need a bit of corridor in roughly the same area to service their own land, which would form effectively one of the initial stages of the Northern River Crossing. But that's more out of good fortune than anything else because, as I say, we have no legal corridor protected there. And as Chris points out, so the Fonterra land covers a large portion of the site, but it doesn't cover all of the site. So it doesn't go all the way to the Kura Drive interchange. So there is a bit of land area owned by another party, and we're obviously encouraging Fonterra to engage with that other party to try and get an integrated outcome.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Kesh. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Immediately.
Chair. Chris, I was just interested in what you just said in terms of our lack of forward planning and, you know, for the past 15 years. So the report says that, you know, the study that we took ages ago said that we'd need the bridge ideally to be completed by 2034, which is 10 years' time. So working backwards, it's on point 34, and when would we have needed to start the designation process to complete it by 2034, or have we just missed the boat or the bridge completely?
So I'm just reading paragraph 34.
Maybe whilst Chris is answering that, Councillor Kesh, so I think the land use is the obvious trigger, right? So I mean, you sort of build infrastructure because you're generally trying to connect a couple of things or activate some land use. So the other important land use component is HT1 and when that growth cell proceeds. And there is no active planning work underway looking at the activation of that growth cell. So in my view, it does buy us some time. If that growth cell was all of a sudden going to be brought forward, then that would place additional time pressure on this corridor.
And is HT1 part of that fast track list, or I can't remember?
I'm not going to comment on that, Councillor Kesh. Can I ask somebody else to talk?
Councillor Kesh Blair here. HT1 is not part of the fast track process.
Okay.
So Councillor Kesh, just reading the report, the context is that was way back in 2011. The report indicated that it needed to be implemented by 2034. So that's sort of a 10, almost 15-year-old observation. So we'd need to go away and update that.
Because it might be sooner, right? Like with our population growth in the north?
Yeah, I guess my flippant answer to that depends on tolerance for congestion.
Yeah, which is very low. Just last question. Point 35, it does say that the designation has funding in year 6, assuming that it's not pushed again. Can you quickly remind me how much that process is budgeted to cost?
From memory, it's probably in the $2 to $3 million range, somewhere around there. And that would not attract subsidy. Not many things do these days, but
All right.
Chris.
Sorry, I can't get
Good questions. Thanks, Councillor Kesh. In terms of the funding for the designation, is the 2 to 3 million, would that be OPEX work or CAPEX? And secondly, would we then basically trigger the whole process of, notification and then being liable to purchase, properties and have to have what would be a much larger chunk of funding available to potentially do that? Or,
all of the above, yeah. So that is the problem with the designation, not only the $3 million, but then it's that obligation you have to purchase land, which we're seeing play out in Rotokauri. So that's the hard side of planning for the future as property obligations you may get. But once again, a little bit, I think, where Councillor Ewan was going, is never any better time to buy property than now, in terms of property escalation or cost escalation. But that is the challenging side. Maybe elected members have started to address that with a strategic property purchase fund and anticipating at times there will be need to buy property. But the designation, like all our other ones, would have a property strategy that would map out, you know, what the likely cost of property would be, the likelihood of early purchase or not.
Okay, thank you.
I was just mentioning to Chair Sarah, value capture would also be a consideration in that process, depending on the nature of the corridor, how it interacts with the surrounding land. I think the key reason we've just brought this item to the attention of the committee here is really that the discussions with Fonterra are now, and their intended plan change are forcing the spotlight on that particular topic on the western side of the river. And hence the need for us to really focus on that as one of the key elements of the discussions with Fonterra as they start to advance their thinking around the plan change. And I think it does, as you've said, Chair Sarah, reinforce the importance of early strategic planning, and certainly we do that as much as possible, but this is one of those projects that, as Chris has said, we need the funding to do the work. And
And we've kept pushing it to the back of our TVs.
If I may, just one comment, like, I think the city's done fantastically well in its future planning with our designations, our ring road, you know, land reserved many years ago and bought early by council way before my time, so our Peacocks and Rotorua. So we've done pretty well in our planning for transport corridors. This is probably the one that's been sitting at the back of the queue and probably the last big designation that we'd want to do for the greater Hamilton area transportation planning, I think.
I think you're right, Chris. I mean, certainly look at our macro long-term plans. This is the one that sort of stands as the last remaining big item.
Final question on it. Is there a strategic, or I guess, should we really be looking at doing it earlier? Or is it, and I know we've got significant funding constraints, but...
I think my quick answer to that, you couldn't start it now and have enough information and time to be able to interact with the current plan change. So it'd be pointless starting it now. I think our best strategy is to work as best as we can on this side of the river with the Fonterra plan change, because that's where the development pressure is. There's probably less development pressure in HT1 at the moment because of zoning and not fast tracking. So I think our best strategy is just to continue working as best as we can with Fonterra.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Chair Sarah. So the final item, I'll just ask Greg to come forward, is just an update on city regional deals and the work that we are doing with our future-proof partners in preparation for the government's announcements in this space.
Cool, thank you. And I think that's the last item in this report, and then we'll go to a break after that. Yeah, after debate. Yeah. All right, thank you, Greg.
Good morning. Excuse me, good morning. I'll take the small piece in the report as read. Just a couple of comments, I guess, updates. So, as you know, we're working with Future-Proof to progress a city regional deal. We're basically doing technical work in around economic analysis and developing a criteria framework with which to put potential projects or programs through, but we are waiting because, and this was confirmed in the Cabinet paper recently, which you may have read, which says that in late July the government is going to, it says it's going to produce its framework for determining how it will progress city regional deals and its governance approach. So until we see that, which is very soon, we're continuing to work with the Future-Proof partners on those more background pieces. I also think it's worth pointing out that in the Cabinet paper, so there was a Cabinet paper recently on infrastructure funding and financing, which I think you've had circulated. But one of the things it says is that it essentially says that the government's going to be scrupulous about how it uses its balance sheet, and it's going to provide tools or modernise its policies, in the words of the paper, which leads to us needing to be innovative about mostly how these are funded and financed, so using targeted rates, using tolling, using private funding, and maybe and also potentially overseas investment. So I think we've got quite a big complex area that we need to move into, but at the moment we're just doing some background stuff and waiting for the government to publish its frameworks. So that's all, if anyone has any questions. The break is more appealing than questions.
I think just to add to Greg's comment, the earlier update on the cabinet paper and the work the work that Greg and Hannah are leading, we're well placed, and there's some very good active conversations. And one of the senior staff who sit around the Future Proof table is leading the advice, isn't she, Greg, on this work to ministers. So we've certainly had a chance to provide some very relevant insights and thinking to that team.
And I guess just one last comment, we will bring something more comprehensive once we've had a proper look at that government framework. So at the moment it's just been pretty brief updates. But
Yep. Thank you. Mangaji Dean.
I think it just answered it.
Okay.
I think the paper talked around changes to potentially DCs as well, so I'm quite keen to understand what that will impact to look like. But what I'm hearing is we're still waiting to hear the detail.
well, actually on that piece I'm involved in that, and what they're looking at doing is making beneficiaries of the infrastructural projects carry more of the load, so move it more towards growth pays for growth. But ultimately you're just choosing who pays more, and as we know with the DC policy, we may be getting to the upper limits of developers' tolerance, so we'll see how that pans out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting in terms of the DCs, given our recent LTP. Okay. All right, thank you so much. Thanks, Greg, for the update. Right, is there anyone who would like to move? Councillor Ewan will move. Councillor Tim, would you like to second? And is there any debate? Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to have just a couple of comments. I found this particular item particularly interesting, and you know, my gut feeling is strategic issues could also be rephrased as opportunities. And what we keep hearing again and again and again and again and again is that our current financial position has weakened our ability to jump at these opportunities. And we all know how we found ourselves in this financial predicament. But we also must acknowledge that as we forego these opportunities, there's a cost in having forgotten these opportunities. We miss out on heading and setting our own direction. We miss out on frequently the value uplift. And this is my critical point. I've raised it on multiple occasions about the opportunity to use our balance sheet better. And I've raised, and I've been unsuccessful in suggesting, that we may need to look at some of our shareholdings and things, such as the airport, and ask us a question. If we were to go to the market and sell 20% of our interest in the airport in a global expression of interest, could we not take that revenue and bring it back and focus on this area, these opportunities? Could you imagine if we had taken that money and said to staff, now go out with a strategy where you see every opportunity for value uplift and we'll fund it through this mechanism? And there's a lot of people, both in staff and elected members, who talk about it's all about the timing. I'm simply swinging the spotlight and saying, talk about the timing, but also acknowledge that there's a loss in not pivoting and leveraging our position in this area. And in fact, I think I'm trying to say to you, we will do better if we did this than our current strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Any other debates? I'll say a few words. I do think that the Northern River crossing has been pushed out in our LTPs, and it ultimately comes down to funding. We did get a correction that there is currently 3 million in year 6 and 3 million in year 7, so 6 million in total, but that won't be including all the obligations around land purchase. And so, yeah, it does show the value in actually doing this work very early. And the other value in that is that you are paying lower land prices and in a better position around value capture and various things. So interesting comments from Councillor Ewan. I think that if we were to look at anything like that, we would absolutely need a rigorous framework around any funding so that it's not seen as an easy opportunity to reduce debt and rates, but it's actually completely ring-fenced for strategic land purchases that add value in terms of infrastructure or opportunity for uplift and other things. So I think there would have to be, mechanisms that we potentially don't have right now to ensure, because you can't just have council policy that can be changed by the next council. But yeah, if that makes sense. But like the Municipal Endowment Fund. Is there anything else? I am slightly frustrated around the Eastern Transport Corridor and the fact that I'm very frustrated that we may be in a position where, we're planning for the future where we want good public transport to be part of the future of our city. It's part of every good, modern, well-functioning city, and potentially have a GPS which is going to not support that is really frustrating, but I'm sure that we'll be able to work through this. We have to make sure that when we do this particular corridor, we build it for the next few decades, not just I think reduce its scope to basically just fit within what this current government is willing to fund. All right, any right of reply?
Yes, please.
Yes.
I think whenever I've raised the opportunity of trying to leverage our balance sheet more appropriately, I have always signalled and been welcoming on trying to earmark those funds so that they are protected and that they are allocated for the purpose that this council has envisaged. And we have, while acknowledging in a democracy we can't necessarily dictate, but we have had examples where we've done that quite well. And I don't think that should be used as an excuse for not doing it, particularly when we spend a lot of our time lamenting what we could do if we had the money, while we're still refusing to play smart with our balance sheet. And so I think all it takes is some heads around a table to say, actually, there is an opportunity here that we're not leveraging, and we put forward solutions rather than barriers. And then we can actually afford to fund, because we've already spent all of our money, right? And so we need to leverage our balance sheet to enable this, and we will reap the benefits. While meanwhile, we are generating 0.026 on our return on investment. That isn't financial prudence. That isn't sensible. Plus, we're missing huge opportunity of value uplift.
To the vote, all those in favour of receiving the report and adopting the FDS, say aye. Thank you. Carry. Oh.
Motion's carried unanimously.
Cool, thank you. We're going to have a break, so a 15-ish minute break, which would bring us back at 11:15. Cool. Yeah, I know, perfect timing. Look at that. Thank you. the comments made in the RMA report around encouraging more mixed use through the MPS, I think it was.
Yeah, okay. A couple of things in there to pick into. Okay, so maybe if I just focus.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, I'll touch on. How about I touch on that now, and then you can come back into the.
Okay, perfect. Yep.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, what I'd suggest is I'll just touch on kind of the district plan report in generality. I suspect there may be some questions on Plan Change 14, so at that, and I'll get Juliana down to answer any of those. So initially, I'll do sort of topics excluding PC 14. So 9, whilst Councillor Ewan's out of the room. So we are gearing up to go into the final set of hearings on Plan Change 9. And we're just about to file evidence. So that last hearing will deal with heritage items. We've received decisions on the earlier tranches of Plan Change 9, so that was archaeological cultural sites, significant natural areas, and notable trees. To date, we've received roughly 3 appeals on SNAs only, as I understand, and they are largely confined to site-specific matters. So given the scale and extent of those topics, that's okay going in terms of us, I think, working through and resolving those. Plan Change 12, I won't dwell on that. I think you're all probably heard plenty about that in the previous few months, but the team's made an incredible effort. They're filing evidence, final round of evidence tomorrow on that, and so really hats off to the team led by Mark Roberts who've been working on that, and we'll move into hearings in September on that. So through executive update and through this committee, we've obviously updated you on that position. Through that. We touched on the Fonterra private plan change in the earlier item, obviously working with Fonterra and their agents in terms of that plan change. So once that is formally lodged and requested on behalf of Fonterra, we'll inform the committee in terms of the processes. So I think, Madam Chair, I'll pause there, and if there's any questions on those matters, I'm happy to take those or get the team to answer.
Okay, so we'll take questions now on everything other than Plan Change 14. I'll start off. I might trigger questions. We'll see. Mark, I've got just some questions in regard to Stage 1 and Fairfield Enderley. So Stage 1, which is wrapped up in Plan Change 12, my understanding is we're trying to encourage density to occur there. What work have we done outside of understanding the water's infrastructure needs to understand the general infrastructure needed to actually support, I guess, a quality development? And I ask that in the context of some of our other areas where we've allowed intensification. We've said we should have learnt some lessons on that, particularly around streetscape and a degradation somewhat of, the general amenity. So, just keen to understand what have we done to date in understanding that.
I might lead off with the answer, but Jackie, feel free to jump in here. But I mean, I think from a planning point of view, the Central City Transformation Plan that was signed off about 3 or 4 years ago really sets the frame of reference for how you would see the environment in sort of Stage 1 Central City changing to support increased density, increased residential living and the like. But the problem with all of that, as we well know, is in terms of funding the delivery of those interventions. And in a fiscally constrained environment, obviously a lot of those interventions that were intended under the CCTP are unfunded. I don't know if, Jackie, you want to comment further on the infrastructure side?
Thanks, Mark. Stage 1, though, goes a lot further north than the Central City itself. And so what work have we done in regard to that Stage 1 Whitiora, Frankton, Mairoa kind of area?
Through some of the initial area plan work which we did back in 2021 and early 2022, we did identify broadly some interventions that would support intensification, but it's fair to say we haven't done any granular planning in terms of kind of very specific interventions like you see in the CCTP for that wider area. The MPSUD, the government's requirements, effectively haven't provided us the time to do that finer grain detailed work that may be required. Yeah.
Okay. Is it, as a starting point, would it be possible just to actually have the work that we've initially done, the broad work under that initial area plan, which I do recall, just to come back to the committee and for us to just start that process of thinking about how we actually provide for stage one and the expected growth there?
Yes, yep. So, but that's more an urban design piece of work in terms of how you change the urban amenity and urban environment to be more conducive to high density living. So there's a whole lot of below ground investment that is also required that I don't think, or I think probably is in its early stages as well.
Yeah, so as part of our master planning work, and this is for waters, so I know that you've already touched on this, we have looked at stage one in its broadest sense rather than just the CBD and what would be required to service that. But I know that your question was for other
Yes,
things.
yeah, because I understood we've done quite a lot in terms of waters, and it is really all those other aspects of infrastructure, streetscaping, and also understanding what's going to happen with those financial contributions and when do we need to ensure aligned projects actually sit in the LTP for financial contributions to be able to kick in.
Look, there's a big package of detailed work we could do in that space, and really it becomes a resourcing question. When a lot of the projects that are required, or that in an ideal perfect world, if funding was no object that you would deliver, well, we're not in that environment. So the question is to how much planning do you do for things which you're not going to be able to fund. So maybe it's a question or action that we take away from here to come back to you with some options. I'm not sure. Blair's got a view.
Yeah, look, I think, Chair Sarah, maybe we can pick it up offline, but I'm just thinking about there might be an opportunity to just refresh everyone's understanding of the Central City Transformation Plan and just how that links to the LTP and PC12. So I've just formulated in my mind.
Yeah, and the area plan that was originally done.
Yeah, I think it's a case of maybe it's just bringing everything together as to where things are now at and what that means in terms of LTP.
Okay, thank you. I'll follow that one up. The other one was Fairfield Enderley. So we had some discussion in the LTP around that coming back, scoping work coming back to us. Just what would be the expected time frame for us to kind of have information come back to understand what is required to even scope out infrastructure needed to support the kind of development that we the likes of Kaingoora and other parties would like to see in that area.
So, Madam Chair, it's fair to say we haven't done the scoping of the scoping yet.
Yeah.
So, look, we simply haven't turned our minds to that yet.
Okay.
So that's probably an action for a future committee for us to come back to. But what I would say is that through Plan Change 12, you'll be aware that we have, tried to align some of the increased densities with Kaingoora's submission for Enderley Fairfield and the Hokonui corridor there. But we are suggesting some triggers in the plan which would give rise to or support an integrated kind of redevelopment outcome. That's tricky in terms of marrying RMA process with kind of effectively LTP and investment processes.
Okay, that was going to be my second question around the PC12 and how we've future-proofed that area for further development. So that's essentially there's triggers in place.
Well, I think you've heard from Jackie through the long-term plan, and there was quite a body of work that I think she provided in terms of the fact, well, we haven't because there isn't funding. So the focus is on stage one at this stage, unless additional funding becomes available for Endley Fairfield. So effectively, how I would describe that is it's effectively in a holding pattern till such time as we have additional funding. There are significant stormwater interventions that are required to enable the densities that are envisaged through that area, and that needs integrated kind of neighbourhood planning to take place, some of which has been done at a high level, but again, without funding, the planning is a little bit of a pointless exercise.
Okay, thank you.
I think, Chair Sarah, that really what we're delving into here, and probably is better for some sort of a workshop-y type discussion, but it's the intersect of not just planning infrastructure, but the wider all of council response to delivering the visions. So look, I think we need to take that one offline just to work that up. But I think there's many parts to this. It's as Marcus sort of said, there's enabling core infrastructure, but there's also the softer elements of actually what delivers this future community as well.
Thank you. And I've got Councillor Kesh and then Mayor Paula.
Thank you, Chair. You asked some of my questions around that Enderley piece. I just have another question. Looking at, what is this? Page 57, the attachment with the PC12 recommended changes. In regards to 5 Crossroads and Chartwell, I might have missed this. I'm sorry if I did, Mark. So there's quite a big difference in terms of more density around Hukanui and bits of Chartwell. Does that mean that is that already infrastructure ready, like is underground?
No. Short answer, Councillor Kesh, no. So
by doing this, what are the consequences, or how do we manage that?
So the connections policy and the district plan provisions work together to manage that, and this was our original submission on the MDRS and MPSUD legislation at the back end of 2021, that there was a disconnect between planning and zone enablement and infrastructure readiness, capacity, availability. And you may recall that we argued pretty hard that increased densities without the corresponding infrastructure would lead to network failure, which would lead to poor water quality outcomes for the hour and therefore breach our obligations to Te Ture Whaimana. So we came up with this kind of middle of the road or balanced approach whereby we're focusing intensification in stage one, where we would have the best opportunity of matching enabled densities with infrastructure investment. So those areas along Hukanui corridor, and there are others, are, how do I put it, turned on from a zoning point of view, but are turned off from an infrastructure point of view. So until infrastructure investment arrives, those densities, it'll be very hard to realise those. But again, I'm straying into Jackie's domain, so she may like to add to that.
It has been some time since we spoke to you about the connections policy and the approval process. So the team are in discussions with governance to try and arrange for a briefing with you to give you an update on where that's at, where the network capacity tool is at, to help inform the public and help support those decisions. But as Mark said, we will be relying on our bylaw and our connection approval process to manage, potential development demand on our network where we don't have sufficient capacity. So we'll come back to you with a date for a briefing on that, just to bring that back to your attention ahead of the next steps around enacting that updated policy.
And Jackie, will that workshop, or have we already done work in terms of our comms and how we manage the expectations of developers? If they look at this, they think, yep, I can intensify in those areas, but might find out afterwards that there's actually no infrastructure that exists to support any intensification.
Yes, we have. So that started in around March last year, where we made it very clear on the areas that we knew there were significant constraints. There has been targeted consultation on the policy, and that will continue as we start rolling out the proposed tool. So it's really important to us to get our developers to understand the constraints that we're trying to manage, but also the process that we're looking to adopt to help us, meet our obligations to Te Ture Whaimana, but also be very clear with them on what the constraints are. So we've presented a number of times to the Development Forum, a public forum with developers invited, just to continue to share, our challenges, the approach that we're taking to try and manage the impacts on our networks, and that will continue, Councillor.
Councillor Kesh, if I could just add to that. So in terms of the district plan's response to that, so it is very clear in the district plan controls that stage 1 is more enabling and the consenting pathway is a lot easier than outside of stage 1. So there's a very clear distinction to those developers who will engage with the district plan. They'll quickly see that it's much easier to get a consent and make it through the various assessments in terms of 3 waters in stage 1 versus outside of stage 1. And then, as we've sort of described it, the bylaw and connections policy is then sort of the backup safeguard sitting in behind that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kesh. Mayor Paula.
Good morning, everyone. Just in respect to that, thank you for answering the questions. I've got a motion I want to propose in a minute, an additional motion, if that's okay. What has happened since, as you're aware, I always put a priority on Fairfield and Enderley as an area of inner city revitalisation. It's really important. Given the Te Koha Health investment, Kāinga Ora being there, we've worked really hard on this. So what changed that it didn't get the priority we thought it might have had when it was identified as a revitalisation area of the city?
Thank you, Mayor Paula. Maybe I'll have the first go at that answer and then maybe ask Jackie to come in as well. But I mean, so from a planning point of view, we've had very good collaboration with Kāinga Ora. Their planning for how they would redevelop their sites in that area in an integrated manner is quite well advanced. We are effectively, from a Plan Change 12 district plan point of view, reflecting some of that in our updated position through Plan Change 12, but it's all subject to infrastructure. So without infrastructure investment, those plans or aspirations are unable to be realised. So I don't know, Jackie, if you want to add to that at all or not? Or?
Yeah, I guess just to add that our infrastructure planning follows land use direction. So our master planning, determining what investment is needed in infrastructure, is all based on the growth projections that we are provided. And as I think I mentioned in the lead up to the LTP, the growth projections that HCC have produced don't reflect the aspirations that Kāinga Ora presented to Council, and that's really why we need to circle back and work with them to scope up the work that would be required to really understand what infrastructure would be required to support their densities and development aspirations. I think it was something in the order of an additional 1,500 to 2,000 dwellings in that area. The material that was included with the LTP deliberations document really sets out what we've assumed, and the two, there's a massive mismatch there. So we really do need to work with them to try and understand what are their aspirations, and then work through the technical assessments that are required to understand what investment is required to service those development aspirations. And then I guess from that point, it's a conversation around, is it a priority for the city and how are those things funded?
Okay, so next question is, because I'll come to talk about it in debate, by the way, you can't be surprised by that when you mention the word priority. Is there any other way in which there can be prioritisation of other areas to give Enderley the quicker opportunity to develop? Surely,
Maybe I'll lead off again, Mayor Paula and Chris and Jackie want to jump in, but you're working in a fiscally constrained envelope, so the decisions made through the LTP prioritise stage one, which is Central City, and some of our back-to-back arrangements with the IEF funding to enable those densities in the Central City. So that's a trade-off that's been made through the long-term plan to invest in stage one as opposed to Enderley Fairfield. But it's been acknowledged that Enderley Fairfield is the second kind of cab off the rank, so to speak, as and when funding becomes available.
I think Mayor Paula Blair here. Obviously, you will be well aware of the resolution passed through the LTP, which asks staff to report back to this committee, to a future committee on the scope, time, cost and resource implications of how Fairfield Enderley can progress. Part of that is also our engagement with Kāinga Ora, and we've only just had one very initial meeting with Kāinga Ora subsequent to their recent government review processes, and they're still working through what that means as well. So we certainly intend to come back to this meeting with further updates, but as Mark and Jackie have said, ultimately there is a link to infrastructure funding. There is also a link to Kāinga Ora's intentions, and they have been shifted and changed recently, so we do need to work with them, and that was the thrust of the initial conversation I've had with Mark Rawson when I met with him recently. So we certainly have that resolution and we're actively thinking about it, but to be fair to the team, we haven't had a chance to go and do a whole lot of work subsequent to the LTP yet.
Yeah. And just the motion that, sorry, just got the motion from the LTP that we approved, which requests, no, that's not it, hold on, I've got it here. So it requested the Strategic Growth Committee consider determining Fairfield Enderley as the second priority area for intensification behind Central City Stage 1, and requested that staff scope the time, cost and resourcing of the associated work programs to undertake the next phase of urban regeneration planning and investment required to enable development in the locality. So basically asking what would it cost to kind of understand and get a proper scoping and everything. Yeah, so I guess that will be in a meeting, that will come to a meeting this calendar year?
Look, it'll come to a meeting this calendar year. To be fair to the teams, we have a substantial work program, and I need to sit down and agree with both Mark and Jackie, etc., where that fits into our work program. But absolutely, we've got it, and we will provide updates this year.
Okay. Thank you. Right, we'll move now to PC 14, just mindful of time, we've got about another half hour. Mayor Paula, are you happy if we have that live motion from the LTP, and then potentially there could be some work, I guess an opportunity offline to further understand where things are at with Enderley for those interested? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll talk to it in debate if that's okay, and hold my thoughts back till then.
Cool, thank you.
Nobody should be surprised.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks. PC 14.
So thanks, Councillor Sarah. And just to introduce Dr. Juliana, who some of you may or may not have met before. It's one of the team leaders in our team who's been leading Plan Change 14. Just before maybe we go to questions, or Juliana sort of gives a bit of an update, just in terms of the history of this, I think that's just important to remind members of. So there was a body of work that was being done through updating Flood Viewer, that was providing an updated evidence base in terms of flooding, overland flow paths, etc., across the city. Roughly middle of last year, we applied to the then Minister for the Environment, Minister Parker, for an extension to our decision-making timeline on Plan Change 12 to allow Plan Change 12 to be informed by this new flood hazard data. So that work's progressed well. and the flood viewer work has been completed and updated citywide, so that has in turn informed some of our zoning decisions under Plan Change 12. The most notable example is the intensification around Dinsdale, which is quite flood affected relative to some of the other areas, and therefore moving some of the high density zoning off some of those areas. There are some final areas that we're looking at under Plan Change 14 before we notify. But I think all being well, this report synthesises sort of where we're at quite well. So I'll hand over to Juliana. I don't know if Juliana, you want to add anything else to that?
Sorry. I think the main point, exactly as Mark mentioned, is the coverage that we have in terms of flood hazard mapping in the district plan and the information that we have right now in terms of flood viewer. So this is one of the main points that Plan Change 14 is trying to address. And apart from that, there are other items that we are considering, but I think the mapping, in general, is the most important part of Plan Change 14.
Cool. Thank you. Do elected members have questions on this particular one? Councillor Emma.
Madam Chair. Thank you for your report. I appreciate the detail in it. Just a few things from, I guess, a civil defence perspective. So the civil defence team is pretty small. And have we discussed option 2 with the civil defence team and what impact this may have on their workload, or what resources might be needed to support that work?
Option 2, you mentioned the non-RMA response?
The non-RMA, yeah, and a portion
We are at the stage of discussing these options of having RMA response and non-RMA response. So we are in discussion with different units of council, including civil defence.
Okay. The report also notes that there'll be some risk to existing residents if we went forward with option 2 until that piece of work was delivered, any prevention work. I guess in the workshop would be looking to identify those a bit further.
I think it's fair to say it's a risky topic. So and all these options and the permutations of them and how they may be married with other kind of remedies need to all be carefully worked through, and that's why we're effectively delaying the notification. And I think the workshop provides us the environment to tease out and work through some of these really specific fine-grained issues with you. I think it's very important that we are eyes wide open in terms of the costs and benefits of the various options, and also the variety of options that we may bundle together as a proposal to you to then make a decision on.
Okay.
So.
If I can just add to that point that Mark made, I'm very conscious of on one hand, we have a resolution from the LTP to look at our consenting processes and all the implications of that. PC14 is another instrument that Council will ultimately introduce, which will have implications for development in the city. And as Marcus and Juliana have said, there's a significant risk lens to this, but there is also going to be what does it mean for development, what does it mean for costs, and what are the various options for mitigating that. So as they both said, a workshop to examine that in detail is important before we run forward, because ultimately Council does have a particularly strong role here in imposing obligations on our development community for good reason, but equally I want to make sure that Council understands those and the choices before we proceed ahead.
There are a range of responses that we can take. In terms of the workshop, Blair, could we ensure that there is plenty of time for elected member questions and discussion in that? So it's
yes, and I think our thinking at the moment is that workshop will be sometime probably in August, post the council break, with a decent amount of time to explore these issues with a view to this probably coming back to the October meeting cycle to allow that to occur.
okay. Thank you. Mark and Juliana, just a question in terms of like the number of properties, say, affected by depression areas. says here 40% of the city, but then the table shows minimal, low, moderate, significant, severe. Just keen to understand, to the extent we can, you're able to discuss it now, what are the different measures that we may look at depending on, where they sit in that spectrum? Because at the very severe and significant end, there are only a handful of properties really, but, when you look at minimal, you've got 10, 11,000, so.
We are actually still considering this in the cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah.
Because, even if you consider that from this 40%, 30% are also overlapped by flood hazards, so they may be assessed in another way, but we still have 10% of properties that only affected by by depression areas. And we are still in this process of the cost-benefit analysis to see if it's better to split them into different categories or consider them all or not consider. So we are still in this process.
Okay.
We decided to break this down into these different categories so we can have a better understanding, because one thing is when we talk about, half a meter of water, and the other thing is when we are talking about definitely risk to life, and we are talking about 3-4 meters. So this is why I decided to split this into these different categories, but we are still exploring them.
Okay.
I think Madam Chair, the important thing to note in this, and the report details it, is the probability of these events. So the depression model, and the team here can speak to the technical aspects, assumes a whole lot of things in terms of culvert blockages and things like that. So the planning response needs to be balanced against those various bits of input data, in terms of the probability and likelihood of these events occurring.
And there is a real risk conversation that I guess it's important that we have with the community more broadly, because from what I'm hearing, there's, on one hand, you've got some really important trade-offs where you might say we're going to be really restrictive in terms of your planning rules, but then that means that has a big economic effect in terms of the developability of properties. At the other hand, you might say let's focus more on investment in larger culverts and civil defence responses and other infrastructure, right? And there's a question of, do we want to have investment in infrastructure that prepares for a 1 in 200-year flood or a 1 in 100-year flood, and what that level of risk is? Is that kind of right?
Yeah, you need to have all the facts in front of you to make an informed decision because of the significance of that. So if you're not going to go with a solely RMA response, that will have other consequences on you in terms of funding, for example, as to what that comes with. And your last point is the fact that, the floods in Brazil recently were 1 in 10,000 years. So what are we realistically planning for here? In certain circumstances, an evacuation plan might actually be the best response, because no matter what you engineer, you're going to really struggle to deal with a 1 in 10,000 year flood event, right? So these are the careful balancing trade-offs that I think you need to be fully across, fully briefed on before you make a call as to how we proceed.
Thank you.
I think just adding to this communication part, comms have been working with us, but we also, regardless of our option here, we need to keep communicating with the community, because even if you have an RMA response, we are only talking about new developments, so everyone that's living there need to know how to react or what to do if something happens.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Cool. Oh, it sounds like it'll be a very interesting briefing. Are there any further questions before we'll move to receiving, and not just receiving the report, but also approving the delaying of the notification of Plan Change 14, and noting the workshop to come? Real good. All right. Thank you, Mark and Juliana. Okay. I will move. Councillor Andrew, would you like to second? Okay. Is there any debate? There is none. Okay. Yes. Mayor Paul, that's right. Mayor Paul, I do recall that now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I have to do this because this is, public record, how I feel about this. I do find it quite disappointing in many ways that we aren't able to have done more from Fairfield Enderley quicker. I do understand all the constraints on infrastructure, and we haven't got money to put everything everywhere. But I think I'd probably been mayor about 2 months when I made it quite clear that revitalising one of our areas that needed some love and attention was really important to me. And it wasn't just about the houses, but it was about the overall refreshment of a community so that they could thrive. And then, of course, I became aware that Kāinga Ora had significant land holdings there already, and they were interested in redeveloping that. Tainui have the port adjacent and their block, and they're interested in that. Te Koha Health were investing a lot of money into health and primary education, and that was great. And then, of course, we had some plans around Te Papanui Enderley House. And so a staff member was working on that. He's no longer with the organisation, and I just assumed that everything was going along quite well. And so I was quite surprised with the plan change, where all of a sudden my desire to uplift an existing area had somehow not been given the effect to the way I would have liked to. Yeah, I know there are other areas that are potentially worthy in the city of development, but this one surely is. We would get so many social, cultural, and well-beings, as well as the houses. And I know that Kāinga Ora can't go ahead straight away, but I need to see some timeline certainty. So all of the players, excuse me, sorry, all of the players involved in this can in fact see a future. Because, don't ask me how long it's been the way it has in Fairfield Enderley, a very long time. And those people deserve the same standard of living as everywhere else. They're not the only part of the city that does, but that's my view anyway.
Thank you,
I did make it a priority, and I don't feel that that was taken as seriously as I would have liked to have seen. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else or keen for lunch? No. Yes, Councillor Emma.
I'll just quickly say, thank you, Madam Chair. Just in terms of Plan Change 12, I think we're all aware that flooding is one of the many hazards for Hamilton City. I'm supporting option 2 as a logical approach because it supports both existing residents and future developments to better prepare and respond to such events. I am just mindful, however, of any extra workload this might have on our civil defence team, as this is just a small portion of their work. So I'll be looking forward to seeing the assessment and identifying any additional work and appropriate resource this would require to adequately respond.
Cool. Thank you. Right. I'll say a few words. I think a common theme today has been funding, and the lack of funding for all the things that we are seeing are really important in our long-term plan. In terms of Fairfield Enderley, look, we essentially the water's infrastructure in the LTP that is there to enable intensification is there in the central city, stage 1 area. Anything else in our infill areas is really largely focused on compliance. And so, it is going to take some significant investment to actually enable the capacity that we need for development in that area. I do think that personally, I would like to further this conversation and look for support from elected members for some resourcing to actually do the scoping work needed that is within council core business. And I guess it will depend somewhat on our LTP amendment and what things are looking like there, but I do want us to seriously consider that. Even if Kāinga Ora right now does not have the kind of mandate and funding that it had, a year or so ago, actually this is a long-term vision that we should have for this area, and I think that it's time for us to be proactive in helping to lead some of the collaboration in this area. Community housing providers, Kāinga Ora, private developers and others, we could bring them together and look at some really good outcomes there. So an investment in public housing will change again, right? So and it will take time for us to actually work out a plan and a vision for this area as well, and with the community who live there. And that's really important. We can't rush ahead without having those conversations. So I ran out of time to talk about Plan Change 14. Anyway. All right. I like the 2 minutes until it's my turn. No. I could. No, I'm going to be even.
Take 30 seconds.
I'll be even-handed with the time here, so. So we'll take that to the vote. All those in favour of receiving the report, delaying PC12 for further work, raise your hands. Aye. 14. Oh, we both, sorry, misleading everyone, that 14, yep. Okay, thank you. Gave Mark over there a bit of a... All right, thank you. Okay, last item before we go to lunch, just the update. We'll take it as read, the general updates, but if there were specific items elected members had questions on, please raise them now. There is, really briefly, at paragraph 22, it talks about cross-council governance meetings. Just wanted to say we recently had Deputy Mayor and Mayor Paula and Councillor Moko were there. We had a meeting with Waikato District Council, and there was positive discussions around waters and collaboration and wanting to try and kind of set in a direction soon so that, we all, I guess Waikato District Council has options they're looking at, but it sounded like their preference is to work with us if we're able to make that work. So I'm not seeing questions? Yes, and we've got Waipa tomorrow. Yeah. Mangai Jadine.
I'm going to just ask a question in relation to what we do at the moment to track our level of service in relation to, as an example, developers. So if a developer comes to us, we're well aware of resource consents and that there's a ticking time bomb and that we stop the clock when we need to go back for further information. But do we have an overarching view with data that supports how well we're doing in that space? And I do recognise that there are tables within the paper that talks about construction time, etc.
Look, I'm not 100% sure exactly what your question's delving into, but we do obviously have performance measures which we report through the long-term plan annual report, service performance measures on both building and resource consents.
I'm happy to provide further.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so when I think about the developers forum that was hosted in 2023 and also the long-term plan submissions where developers were talking about how it can be not as smooth as they would like to deal with Hamilton City Council to get projects through. So that's, I guess, the context of, so I'm trying to understand from a data perspective how much truth there is to what they're saying.
To avoid sort of trying to get into all the detail, and I do note again through the long-term plan, Council passed a resolution to establish a working group to look at the topic of our, I guess, consenting and I guess the challenges and opportunities in relation to consenting, and it sits under this committee. So that group is yet to convene, but I would expect that that type of question would be one of the matters that would be canvassed through that group. At a very high level, we do, the consenting process has become more complicated through a range of regulatory, risk, infrastructure-related challenges, along with continually changing government obligations. So certainly that is a context which all councils face, not just Hamilton. But of course, in our context, and it's been well reported, for example, some of the reasons why some developers may feel frustrated is because the areas they're seeking to develop, there simply isn't the infrastructure capacity in that particular part of the city to be able to respond to development. So that will be one of the many reasons. Some of it will be also in relation to information required, sought, but I would expect Mangai Jadine those topics to be canvassed through that working group and ultimately, themes brought back to this committee in terms of both opportunities to respond to that, and I know Councillor Bitter earlier raised tell us in terms of capital projects if there's something we differently, if there are things that may be identified through that, it'll come back to this committee for consideration.
Kia pai, thank you, because I'm also trying to understand what can they do better, but also what can we do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mangai Jadine. And Blair, I was just thinking maybe if elected members have key issues they'd like to see that working group look at and they're not on the working group, that is there something that they could email to, ensure that those things are picked up or at least considered?
Happy to receive any emails on that, and I note that I've yet to sit down with Deputy Mayor Angela and yourself, Chair Sarah, just to kind of scope it up. So we're sort of suffering post-LTP recovery at the moment, but we will certainly be sitting down to have that initial conversation before we initiate that working group.
Awesome, thank you. Good questions, and I think, if you're able to feed into that working group, Mangai Jadine, I think that would be good.
That other members are able to attend that working group. And so perhaps a Mangai, if they're kept informed about when those meetings are, can also participate should they choose to.
Yeah, okay. I have just one question on Central City, if there's no one else. The Central City development update and this committee has kind of the overarching oversight over the Central City Transformation Plan. My question is, noting the lack of funding, we have to do anything further that's kind of transformational. What opportunity do we have to use some renewals funding to help to refresh some of the very old street furniture, I guess just to improve the streetscape, and that's coming through from Vanessa Williams and
So there are a couple of opportunities. So through the long-term plan, the elected members resolved to do the 150k per year. So there's that. And then there's also the first 2 years as well, which is 150k per year. So what we're doing is we need to work closely with the infrastructure and assets group, particularly the transport team who are responsible for delivering that. The Central City Transformation Manager, Lehigh, who's not here today, will help prioritise that and work with Vanessa to sort of identify where those best locations are. And then the transport team will go forth and make that happen.
Okay.
I think the other thing, just coming back to the element around funding in the Central City Transformation Plan, so if we look at the theatre, the regional theatre is a really good opportunity to start and make that sort of big bang transformation in terms of streetscape around there. And we've also got the public realm design guidelines as well. Quite a good document in terms of guiding the look and feel over time. The challenge again is funding to do that. But we have to look at those opportunities like the theatre, like other developments, like the new hotel that's going in Ward Street, and take those opportunities to update the streetscape then.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And just in terms of, I guess, the opportunities around renewals and whether there are any, is that able to come back to us along with the other funding that we put in LTP?
Yeah, I think that is something that we need to look at with the transport team.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Like all renewals, and I'd do a disservice to Chris if I didn't answer this, but we note that the renewals budget was through the LTP was tight and has a high risk against it. So I'm just seeing Chris nod there. So there's not excess funds sitting in the Central City renewals.
The answer might just be no, so that's okay. I'm asking for a friend. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I'll move the report, and Mangai Jadine, would you like to second all those in favour of receiving the report? Oh, debate, sorry, I was looking at the time thinking, gosh, okay, right, debate, yes, Councillor Andrew.
On page 74 of the report, there are two interesting graphs, which if you take the time to get to them. The top graph shows the construction time of your typical detached house, and also your typical attached duplex or apartments. But I'll focus on the detached single dwelling, which we're all familiar with. The construction time has increased from 6 months to 11 months. That is nearly double. Most of that change happened in the last 4 years, from 2019 to 2023. The reason given for this is high demand on the construction sector, supply and labour shortages, and council workload. But when we look at the bottom graph, which in green shows houses under construction, we can look at 2019 and 2023. 988 houses in 2019, 990 houses in 2023. Essentially the same number. So it has nothing to do with high demand on the construction sector, supply and labour shortages. It's a council problem. This alone adds $15,000 interest to the average house, with $15,000 of extra overheads on the builder, maintaining that extra 5 months of site services and stuff. And when you add on the front end delays and getting the consents in the first place, you get probably about $50,000 extra for the average house. DCs in some areas are going up by $50,000 per house. If we can fix the delays, people can afford the DCs. That has huge implications for our finances.
Is there anyone else who would like to debate? There isn't? Okay. All those in favour of receiving the report, say aye. Thank you. Okay, excellent. Right, we're going to have a break and we'll come back at... Oh, yes, excellent. Yes, let's do that. So we will resolve to exclude the public. Thank you, Councillor Maxine. Thank you, Councillor Ewan. All those in favour? Aye. Okay, all right. The multitude of public now must leave, and we will see you all back at 1 o'clock.